Hello again. It's great to be back. I hope to find you all well fed and not tired. It's been a long journey these 2 days. Before I start, and something I forgot, I have to read some legal things on our presentation. So I'm going to do that in Spanish because it's a requirement from the company. So on the first slide, thank you. Esta presentación está protegida por derechos de autor a favor de Pearson y terceros. Se prohíbe su reproducción total o parcial, así como el uso de su contenido sin consentimiento por escrito de Pearson Educación de México S.A.D.C.B. y o cualquiera de sus empresas filiales y subsidiarias según el caso. De igual forma y con fundamento en los artículos 15 y 16 de la Ley Federal de Protección de Datos Personales en posesión de particulares, hacemos de su conocimiento que Pearson Educación de México S.A.D.C.B., en lo sucesivo Pearson, es responsable de recabar sus datos personales, del uso que se le dé a los mismos y su correspondiente protección, únicamente con los fines detallados en el aviso de privacidad integral que se encuentra disponible en la página de internet que se presenta a continuación. Thank you very much. So, topic is, it goes along with the title of the seminar, the conference. And it's one that has been long discussed in terms of understanding, if you will, the necessity of making, thank you, the necessity of creating a system that brings more benefits and bring the actual equality and justice to all sort of students. Now, coming from Venezuela, as you well know, I'm Venezuelan, has allowed me to bring an insight, a different perspective on what's been happening, a phenomenon that has been taking place for the past decade, if you will, and that affects directly not only the educational system, but also the economy, society, and so on and so forth in different places around the world. We've been suffering a massive movement of people fleeing from the country, as you well know. And why do I bring this topic here? Because it's part of what's happening, and it's part of what is affecting, and what's part of the actual necessity of understanding the actual concept of inclusion. When you have all this amount of people moving from country to country, these people come with their own baggage, cultural backgrounds, different necessities, different backgrounds of all sorts. And what happens now, and what's been happening for some time, is that people fit into the educational system. And that's the concept of integration. So the system absorbs these people, and there are certain adjustments that are made in order for these people to succeed academically speaking, if you will. But that's not the entire insight of inclusion. So we're going to be discussing and we're going to be clarifying in this next hour or so the concept of inclusion. What is exactly inclusion? How do we see inclusion in education? How can we be more inclusive? What sort of strategies can we implement to become more inclusive? The idea of diversity, what is it? What does it look like? What are the challenges in the inclusion and the diversity concept? How can we build a more culturally diverse environment? What to avoid? Ableism. And we're going to come up with a conclusion. So, besides this immigration situation, there is in recent years the number of diagnosed students has just skyrocketed. There are different cases of all sorts of disabilities, impairments, classification changes, the names change, issue remains. And this is something that, again, educational systems in many parts of the country, especially in our countries, are not taken seriously, if you will. Where does this come from? How far back can we start looking at the concept of inclusion? I was tracing, I was doing some research and I was trying to trace the concept of inclusion in educational system. And I found something really, really interesting. The American president, Charles Eliot, started to paintbrush the concept of inclusion back in 1898. So it's not a new concept. The problem, the challenge of this inclusive theory is that it's taken as part of the educational system, which is not, because it's a philosophical and structural situation. It's not just some adjustments that can be made. And if you have the opportunity to read, for example, in the letter that President Eliot wrote to the Board of Education, you might find that his main idea was to try to consider and understand the different necessities of the students represented in certain ideas of an 18-year-old student. So this is not a new effort. However, it's been truly misunderstood. And there are other evidences of these, of certain ideas that have come up from, for example, the United Nations Education for All program back in the 1990s. There was also the World Conference on Special Needs Education. And I want to make a stop here because this is mostly the focus of what is being considered as inclusion. We tend to think that readapting curriculum, readapting infrastructure, creating certain ease for students with special needs is inclusion. That's not the case. That's just integration, and that's what I want to make clear. So, other examples, the latest was launched in 2016 by UNESCO, Education 2030 Framework for Action. If you search for these programs, you will notice that these programs mainly focus on the adaptation of the educational, to insert these kind of students, these students with these specific characteristics into the educational system. So, and that's not what we seek. What we should go after is try, and this is why I said this is a philosophical situation. We have to think of how to create a system for the students, by the students, not to try to fit the students into the educational systems. Why? Because the difference is the necessities of the students are placed before creating the educational system. So what is inclusion? Inclusion is, according to the concept that we researched on these programs, the process of educating children in such a way so that it benefits all students and entails a clear participation as well. Key concept here, participation, that allows, the system must allow the students to participate regardless of their cultural situation, financial situation, physical situation, gender, race, sex. These are the considerations. It's not just to fit students into the system despite their, let's say, physical necessities. So, therefore, the inclusive approach is considered as education for all. This should be the focus of the discussion. The discussion should not be just on students with special needs, which fits into one of the categories, okay? So, there. Clarifying concepts, then, what is integration? Integration is the process in which students with special needs, and I emphasize special needs, are absorbed into the mainstream education. So the system is there, system has been created, then certain adaptations, certain modifications are created in order to benefit these type of learners. That is integration. Therefore, in this approach to education, the emphasis is on fitting into the mainstream education. Although the approach aims at catering to the needs of the students with special needs, these can increase, and here's the risk, labeling of students due to pre-existing structures and attitudes. Everything we've created so far has been created on the idea that we have a specific system. That specific system, meaning the human person, is for 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 ears, let's say physically normal. But what is normal? And this is the barrier. And everything has been created on the idea that this normality takes place. There is where the big challenge lies. Because we are not all the same. We're completely different. Cognitively speaking, we all are different. We have advantages and we have areas to improve. And the system hasn't been created to tackle those simple differences. Let alone the idea of having students with certain differences, but with great capacities as well. Because one of the things that one of the biggest mistakes of the system that we understand now is that it focuses on the lack of, instead of how or where the strengths of all students are. And this is key. This is a clue for improving the systems. Systems should look at the students on the positive side. What are the strengths of our students? Do we know the strengths of our students? Do we focus our plans and our curriculum on the strengths of the students? That's one thing that we have to start thinking of. Let me give you an example on a personal example on the concept of integration. I was a preschool teacher back in 1997. I spent 8 years teaching preschoolers. I think it's been the most nurturing experience I've ever had as a teacher. Exhausting, but very nurturing. I worked at a preschool that had these special classrooms, integration classrooms. So we had special cases for Down syndrome, students within the spectrum, different disabilities. And everything that was done in that school based on the system was to adapt the student to the system, not the system to the student. So that's purely integration. You have students with certain disabilities or certain differences, and we do everything we can to push the student into the system and make the student successful in that system. So we're not considering the necessities of the students per se, and we're not focusing on the strengths of those students. For example, if you know a bit of the spectrum, you know that most of these children that suffer or that are within the spectrum have great capacities, great cognitive capacities, some of them. They've got, I happen to have one of students, his name, Ricardo Hernandez, I will never forget his name, was incredibly smart. The things that he could recall, specific details and with numbers, they're great at many things. But the system focused on their disabilities. And that's a huge mistake that we're making. And that leads us to the concept of exclusion. Why? Because in some way, somehow, we are excluding these students, these learners, due to their actual occurrent situation, to be more successful in life. And educational systems should be created with the idea of really providing students with actual opportunities to succeed, not only in the academics, in life. That's why in the morning I was very emphatic on the fact that we teachers as leaders need to push our students to do their best so they can become not only good teachers but good leaders in life. So exclusion says that it's concerned with the inability to participate effectively in economic, social, and cultural life, and in some characteristics, alienation and distance from mainstream society. That means we have a specific alignment for society. Everyone should go aligned to that society, regardless of or in spite of their differences. That concept, if you look at it, it's cold-blooded, it's very exclusive, because it does not allow students with special necessities or students with differences to be successful in the end. So the educational system must be rearranged and perhaps, I'm going to say something very strong, re-engineered from zero, because we need to start thinking. I know it sounds hard, but our educational systems are built upon the idea of integration and not inclusion. What are some of the challenges that the term inclusion presents? For one thing, and I think the simplest thing, is to be well informed, to understand the difference between inclusion and integration, to be honest about the fact that in the educational institutions we practice integration and not inclusion. Is it bad? No, we're still learning, we still have a long way to go, but it's a first step. So teachers, policymakers, politicians, you name it, they are not well informed. We are not well informed. So that's step number one. The other challenge that we're facing is the use of certain, in this case, the use of the inclusion flag as a form of political gain. And that's not new. So we use this for personal benefit. We include and we talk about inclusion very freely, and then we're not practicing it. So it's something that comes, I think, within our culture. Then it's a philosophical and practical implication. It's more than a concept. When we say philosophical, it has to do with the rearrangement, taking the system put it upside down, shake the tree, and start doing whatever it has to be done in order to start making inclusion happen in the classrooms and in the educational system. And then it's practical implication. Yes, it's called practical implications because we don't need the entire system to change in order for us to start changing. We can start from zero, from scratch, and from very little, from knowing our students, from knowing their necessities, from adapting and creating our classes based on those needs. That's the key. That's how we can start. We can start from very simple things. So we don't have to wait for governments, we don't have to wait for ministries of education, we can start from the classroom. And one of the things, and this is why I opened my statement with the immigration problem that we're suffering, especially the south part of America, which you can see every day hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans walking thousands of miles to look for a better place to live. It's a multicultural flood, and these impacts everywhere. I'd like to ask you, how many Venezuelans have you met recently here in Costa Rica? I guess not only my face. I know personally, I know 3. Me. So, and we call ourselves the new Chinese immigration, because we are everywhere. So when we go, when this phenomenon takes place, that affects directly the educational system. And we have to consider what the situation of these people are. Now, forget immigration. How many of your students bring their own baggage to the classroom? Their personal problems, their personal challenges, their personal situations. How do we know that that student who is sitting down in front of the camera is doing okay? Do we make sure that happens? Do we take the time to get to know their needs? Do we base our classes and our execution of the classes, not the students, in order to meet those necessities? Do we really know why they are taking our class? That's inclusion. Inclusion is not a political flag that has colors or shapes. Inclusion is to start thinking from the simplest things, the simplest facts of getting to know your students, creating multicultural and diverse, culturally speaking, classes. That's inclusion. It's not only what we have known for decades. There, thank you. Inclusion is not only adapting students with special necessities to the educational system. It goes far beyond that. Could we have a check on the chat, because I see that the bubble has, maybe there is some participation on the chat. Thank you. No? Okay. So let's clarify these concepts. Let's make these concepts absolutely clear. And let's take a look. The definition, the mainstream education focus on change that have to be made in order to fit or create inclusion. Inclusion, process of educating children in such a way that it benefits all students and entails a clear participation, whereas the integration is where we get the students and fit them into the mainstream. The focus in inclusion is not fitting the student into the mainstream, but improving, and I love this part, improving participation of all students. How can we improve that in our personal, individual classrooms? How do we manage to promote real participation in the classroom? This is something that you teachers need to think and reflect on daily basis. How do I improve? How do I take my, how do I give what they need? How do I promote actual participation? How applicable is that I'm teaching? Is it something they forget once they open the door and walk away, or when they shut down the computer, or do they really apply it in their lives? Inclusion focuses on all students, not only students with special necessities or students of one specific gender or students of one specific social class, so on and so forth. So inclusion is for all. And the change in inclusion is based on changing the system rather than changing students to fit the education. So the actual school, the system undergoes a change in order to adapt to the student. Contrary to the integration, which accommodate the students. The integration accommodate the students to be fit for the educational system. Integration focuses on students with special needs, special necessities, and the students are prepared to fit into the mainstream education. That's the major challenge. Now, how can we be more inclusive? There are certain things that we can do, and the idea of all educational systems should be to allow students to become integral, profitable parts of a society, of a community. Otherwise, why are we here? What's our job? What's our purpose? Our purpose is to form, to create people that are useful for our societies. Okay? So they can all leave their own legacies. So we can do certain things, like accepting. It's the first thing we need to do. Accept that people are different. Accept that those differences are advantages. We are trained to look at the dark side of stories all the time. We're not trained to look at the positive things. So this is the first thing we need to do. We have to start thinking differently, meaning accepting people for who they are, and always focusing on what the positive things they bring into the classroom. What is it that is positive about my students, okay? Provide support. Pay attention to your students. Get to know them. Find out what they like. Find out what they don't like, where they come from. If there is an issue in their lives, because that affects the final result. We care for results only. How about the journey, the process itself? This one, I love this one. Have high expectations of all children, of all students. Why? Because we all have great capacities. It's not what we lack of. We can't focus. It's like looking, if you've got a friend on wheelchairs, do you look at the wheelchair or do you look at the person? What are we trained for? Are we trained to look at the person, or are we trained to look at the wheelchair and the person? It's that. We all have strengths, We all have great capacities. There's the focus. You have to move away those barriers. Now, the goals. And I was talking about the fact that we have to look at the strengths of the students rather than the disabilities or the issues or the problems or the challenges. You use the word that suits you best. And I was about to say that we talk about personalized education. This is a very complex concept because in order to be true, then we must have the specialist develop actual goals according to those special needs, right? Is it a lot of work? Of course it is a lot of work, but that's part of what we should do. If we really want this personalized education to take place. So it's something that we have to start thinking from the moment we start our plans. We need to know our students up front, and we need to understand their strengths and their challenges. Then the other thing that we must, or we could do, is to have trainings in order to develop real leadership in, for inclusion in institutions. So there could be an appointed person to develop these skills or to develop the competencies necessary to work for inclusion. That would be a start. Teachers that have certain knowledge of inclusion should help others, and we could base our knowledge on other experiences. So interinstitutional experience is always a plus, and I'm going to show you towards the end. I'm going to show you where to find more information on inclusion. And teachers, principal, parents should work together in the end in order to create this database, this knowledge which is necessary for us to start knowing the actual needs of all our students. Now, let's jump to diversity, a complementary idea on inclusion. And this idea of diversity has to do with differences and has to do with accepting again how different we can be. The idea of diversity is really nurturing in education. Believe it or not, it seems like something of some sort of acceptance, if you will, but there are lots of benefits when it comes to diversity. And let me give you some of the ideas on the benefits of inclusion and diversity. For example, right here, cognitive skills have diversity and inclusion have a special impact on the development of cognitive skills. How so? It's very simple. People with different knowledge, people with different ideas, people with different opinions. When your opinions, when your beliefs are challenged, you have to start building up on the ideas that you know in order to get to a middle point. So that requires your cognitive skills to be developed. So you tackle, just by having different opinions, you start working on the development of cognitive skills. Also critical thinking, creativity. Why? The more information you obtain, the more opportunities you can develop to do things differently. Now, if you're told to do the same thing in the same way, there is no opportunity for developing critical thinking or creativity for that matter. Intellectual engagement. I'm going to go back again to the idea of immigration. This is a great opportunity, and culturally speaking, it's very enriching having people from different parts of the world to bring in their own cultural backgrounds, so you can get to know different things, different customs, different ways of looking at life. So that provokes and that brings up to an understanding of the world, an understanding of different intellectual levels or different intellectual engagement. And of course, it allows us also to develop problem-solving strategies. So people with different points of view, people with different ideas in the classroom are always welcome. It should be a must. We can't just pretend to create or to manufacture students with the same ideas. That goes against every single aspect of inclusion and diversity. Now, here. How can we manage diversity in the classroom? We go back to the basics. And it's to learn, we start from learning about our students' cultural background. It's the first step, the first thing. Even to get to know your students well. Even though they come, I've been here for 2 days, and because of the championship last night, I learned a great deal about Cartago and their habits and the things that the rest of Costa Ricans say about Cartago and how they make fun of these situations. And I learned a great deal of cultural information. And it's beautiful, because these are things that only you know, and these things only happen if you allow this to happen within the classroom. So how different? Within the same country, we have lots of differences, culturally speaking, and I can speak for my own country. For example, in Venezuela, we have different forms of speaking Spanish. We have, and I'll say, people from the coast speak one way. They speak very fast. People from the western part, which is the Andes, they have a similar accent to Colombians. We have a specific area of the country, which is a state, is called the Zulia state. And these are the only people in Venezuela that we know of that speak with the word vos. We don't use it. These things bring a whole lot of new information, knowledge, cultural information that can be used. And that's inclusive if we use it. So the thing is, do we know these things? Do we apply these things in our classrooms? What else? Allow students to learn about their community. What we do, we transform lives, and this is something that I was saying from the beginning this morning. We are here to transform lives. If we don't understand this, we can't expect our students to impact their communities. It's not only what happens here, it's not only what happens in the classroom, it's what surrounds them. How can we use that information? How can we use that in order to exploit what they're learning inside the classroom? And interestingly, if you wish, you could, for example, check out this Zero Indifference Negative Behavior Policy. It's a very interesting research, and it comes back to 1954 in a legal case in the United States, in Kansas. It was the first rule of the United States Supreme Court against segregation. The case was called Brown versus the Educational Board. So the basis of this idea is to promote openly, without segregation, without ableism, the inclusive element into the classroom. So it would be a great idea, and this is perhaps a kind of I urge you to read this zero indifference negative behavior policy, and be aware of all times of practicing somehow, and this is something that we see sometimes or very often. I don't want to perhaps point fingers here, but we discriminate sometimes, even if we don't do it consciously. We discriminate people with physical disabilities. Just by not having, for example, ramps for people that are on wheelchairs. That's a form of discrimination. And these are things that are very simple, but still falls into the category of exclusion. Now, if we don't know where to start, if we're not certain on what to do, if these ideas are not, let's say, enough or good enough for you, you can always find some experts in the subject of inclusion. There is this organization which is called CAST. Can we put the page on, please? The website. This organization has been working since 1984, and they started to work on adaptations to include technology in the education. And now they work openly for inclusion. These people is called CAST, and they have that one, exactly. They have, can we click on who we are, please? Thank you so much. About CAST. And they have their mission. They have this beautiful program called University Design for Learning, and this is an example on how an organization has created an entire framework for inclusion. It's very simple. You can find these organizations in different parts of the United States, and these are simple ideas that you can implement in your day-to-day classroom. Now, can we go back to the presentation and play the video? There is one clip that explains this Universal Design for Learning framework. It's very simple. I'd like to play it for you so you can see what it's about and what they're doing in order to include that. Thank you. To make inclusion possible.
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Classrooms are highly diverse, and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet this diversity. Universal Design for Learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal Design for Learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in a classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have three broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning, and a curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. Captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1, provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied supports. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and supports for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3, provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interests and autonomy. Help them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways, allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways, and offer options that engage students and keep their interest. Universal design for learning equals learning opportunities for all. For more information on UDL, go to www.cast.org.
As you can say, it's a very simple approach. It's very, very simple. It provides you with 3 simple steps, but from the beginning, the main question I discussed in the morning, what's your purpose? And add in what the barriers are. So it's getting to know your audience, getting to know who you're dealing with, who you're teaching, and having a clear vision of what you are doing there. And this UDL is a very simple approach that you perhaps can take on, but it's an easy step to start with. So there are other thousands of examples on how to implement inclusion in the classroom, and this is very simple. I think this is one of the simplest ways to do it, because this can be incorporated in your lesson plans. You don't need the Ministry of Education or God or the President to change things. So you can start changing things from your classroom. And remember something, inclusion has to do with how we see, understand, treat, respect others and ourselves. If we have this clear, we can take on the path of inclusion. So thank you very much.